Hey, what is going on? This is the Connect podcast, and I am sitting here with Senior Pastor Matt Manning.
Yes, after the conversation
To
we
my
just
right,
had.
that's right. And also with us today we have Rodney Perry, and we are really excited to have Rodney here. Rodney, you are pastoring at Central
Baptist Church, Denver,
Yes.
Colorado.
Yes, right down. You're in downtown Denver, downtown. That's
Denver.
right.
You can't get any more downtown than
We're
Central.
in the thick
That's
of it,
right.
Yes.
That's right. Because it used to be. Is that the one that used to be in 4 Points area?
It's still 5 points area.
It used to be 4 Points, and then they added one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was dating myself there. No, 5 Points area. Yeah, because that's where was it? It was before COVID that the ABCRM region gathering was
Yes.
there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the year before COVID.
Yes.
2019.
That's right.
Yeah, the last live hosting was at Central.
That's right.
Absolutely, very cool. Well, and we were talking before. You've been pastoring there for 5.5 years.
5.5 years. This past June marked that time for me.
Very cool, and you're loving it.
Loving it.
Yeah.
However, there is transition. But
Yes.
we're loving it.
Yes, always. And I mean, the last year has been insane for everybody. So,
Right.
but you guys you're powering through. You said, I loved what you said. You said God is faithful.
God is faithful.
Yes, it's very good.
Yes.
Well, we're excited to have you today. We're going to be talking a little bit. We actually had Rodney, and we have a couple of other guys with us last time.
No, it was just Rodney. It was right after the George Floyd shooting.
That's right.
We were just starting the podcast, and we thought, man, this should be something we talk about.
Yes.
And we invited Rodney about a little over a year ago
Right.
Yeah.
to come join us. So we thought it would be cool to do a
Recap
yes,
or
a
a
sequel.
revisit.
A
A sequel.
sequel.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Rodney's come back. We're gonna address a little bit more and dive into what does it look like practically for us to move forward as a culture when it comes to racism and racism in our culture and especially within the Christian community. But before we dive into all of that, I know that you guys have known each other for quite a while as well. Maybe you guys could give us just a little bit of history, and I would love to hear one of your favorite memories of each other, if you have one.
yeah.
Go ahead,
Well,
Matt. Who's first?
Yeah. So
Rock,
Rodney,
paper, scissors.
When did you start at the region?
This is the second time around. So
Yeah, but I mean the first
the
time.
first time was after I left Greater St. John,
Okay.
probably a couple of years into that. So that might have been 2014,
Okay.
2015. something.
Yeah, so that's when Rodney and I met each other
Yeah.
because I was serving on the board. He was part of region staff, and we just became friends out of that
Right.
experience. And I was always, what would be the word? Maybe confused, flummoxed, because you went to ILIF Seminary, right?
Right.
And ILIF is a pretty more progressive seminary in terms of liberal theology and whatnot. And what I know of Rodney is more on the conservative side.
Right.
And so I asked him one day, like, hey, this doesn't match in my mind. Like I need you to help me match this. And, well, why did you go to ILIF?
It was certainly to stretch my theology.
Yeah.
It was intentional. Let me
Mhm.
say that. I knew that it was a very progressive theology setting, but I wanted to stretch myself. I wanted to be around the table with people that thought different than what I was. So you were not off keel when you
Yeah.
had that thought. So.
Yeah, and when he answered that way, I was like, "Oh man, this is going to be a guy that I love hanging out with." And so, but that's not my favorite memory of Rodney.
Can
My
I just
favorite-
ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Did anything change?
No.
No. You just got more grounded in
Yeah,
what you believe?
My confirmations
Yeah.
were made.
That's
There
good.
you go.
That's good.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Your favorite memory.
Yeah, so my favorite memory of Rodney is not funny. It's actually awesome. So when COVID happened last March, the first person in the ministry world to call me to see if I was doing okay was Rodney.
Mm-hmm.
He picked up the phone maybe 2 days. It was probably that Monday after
Yeah.
we'd closed.
Mm-hmm.
And he called on that Monday, and I picked up the phone and I said, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Man, I was just calling to check on you to see how you're doing." And it was just such a important moment. Like, it was just this, like, man, this is a guy who really cares.
Mhm.
And then the great irony, I guess, of that is after that, Eugene called, and then Shannon Warner called, and
They had a meeting beforehand. and
yeah,
they-
and
they
so
scheduled it out.
it was my black pastor friends who called to reach out to see how I was doing.
Yeah.
And none of my white pastor friends called me. I don't know what that says. But anyways,
I called you, but it wasn't to encourage you.
That's right. But no, anyways, Rodney called. He was the first one to call on that Monday when the world seemed like it was falling apart, and I was 65 days into a senior pastor ministry and just shut down the church.
Yeah.
And Rodney had the wherewithal to give me a call and just to see how I was doing.
That's good.
Yeah.
Love it.
Well, my wife Sheila just fell in love with Matt, so she is really the driving force. So it may have been her who nudged me to check on Matt.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
sure. No, but we fell in love with Matt when we first met him. Just I think I really got to know him when we were at a summit or of the USA, American Baptist USA, and we were having ice cream. So Matt and I took a few moments to just share and talk while we were having ice cream. The whole region delegation met at an ice cream stand, and we just stood around, talked, and got to know each other. So
was that in Denver?
It was Portland, wasn't it?
I think it was Portland.
Yeah,
either Portland or Kansas City. I'm not sure. Must have been Portland.
Yeah, one of those two. I remember Sheila. Well, in Portland, I remember we got on the train together because we were on the same flight on the way back.
Right.
And all the way, Sheila and I talked on the train, and then on the way to the gate, and then we talked to the gate, and then they finally put us in different chairs.
Yeah.
And
you couldn't talk anymore?
We couldn't talk anymore, yeah.
You're still shouting over the...
Yeah, Rodney wouldn't give up his aisle seat for me to sit next to his wife
I
to
get you.
continue the conversation.
Like that was the right decision. Well, awesome. I know, I mean, there's so many things going on all the time in the world around us, and we're all in pastoral ministry trying to keep up with what's going on around us, and also to lead well, right? Like that's part of our calling is to help lead our people well. And so as we've looked at the last year, and especially in retrospect to the last time that we spoke with you, are there things that you see that are going on, whether that's coming from the church or whether that's coming from other sources in our culture that you see? Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Where do you see us, the trajectory of us going when it comes to racism, at least in America and in our culture, our specific culture?
Well, I think what we can say is that there is greater awareness. People are trying to respond. We are seeing around the country, in particular, that there is a great concern. There is great effort that's being put forth to try to address this 400-year-old problem in America. And the other side of that is that there's frustration that is not changing as fast as we all would like or hope. And so that's a recurring theme as I talk to people who are engaged in this work, that it's necessary work, but it's tedious, and it's not moving as fast as we'd like.
Do you have a specific example of someone who's doing that? What kinds of things are they doing in order to help our culture pivot in that direction?
I think again, just bringing awareness to people in general.
And so when they feel like it's not moving fast enough, there's still a majority of people that are just kind of going about life, and you don't feel like that they're as aware?
They're not as aware.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
And then there is the issue of dealing with systemic racism, the issues that are born out of that.
Sure.
If one instance is redlining of housing, where there is still problems with blacks acquiring capital to be able to purchase homes, to get their credits to the point where they can be homeowners. There's just
Can you do me a favor?
Problems.
Just for people who may be listening to this and they hear systemic racism, what is that actual definition?
That is a system of racism. That means that it is rooted, it's grounded, and there are practices that perpetuate that.
Got it. So like legal practices that are making that happen. I actually heard an interesting story of a lady who was trying to get her house appraised, and she was a black lady, and had the same company kept sending an appraiser to her house and was appraising really, really low. And then they staged a white family there, and it actually appraised for way higher, which I think is an example. I know that there's people out there that feel like, oh, it doesn't actually exist. It's a made up thing. But then every once in a while, you'll hear these stories come out of the woodworks that you go, oh, it may not be true for you. Like you may not see it in your realm of influence, but it doesn't mean
Right.
that there aren't instances out there that it's happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a great example
Yeah.
of systemic racism.
Yeah. So sorry, I didn't mean
No.
to derail your thoughts there.
But those practices are in place. So
Sure.
systemically, that creates a problem. When we're talking about equitable positioning,
Mm-hmm.
it's real, and until we can acknowledge that, we can't address it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Rodney, what did the significance of what happened in this last month of Juneteenth, what did that significance personally to you and the significance of that to the Black community? And maybe if you would just explain a little bit of what that is, because I don't know that everybody maybe understands what Juneteenth is.
Yeah.
Juneteenth deals with a group of slaves in Texas that did not get the notice that slavery had ended until 2 years after that emancipation. And so it's a celebration of them getting that notice. However, personally, I don't think that's a point of celebration for me. I would not like to be in ignorance of my liberality for 2 years. So we're sort of caught between. So you will just have that debate on both sides within the Black community. Is this something we should be celebrating, that we were left in ignorance for 2 years? Or is this something that we do need to acknowledge? Well, there needs to be an acknowledgement, but we've gone to, now it's a national holiday and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So we want to support it, but there's still some apprehensions about
I would say
what
the
that
good
really
about
means.
it, though, is that, I mean, one good thing about it is that it is helping to bring awareness.
Yes.
Right? If that is part of the goal, is to help bring awareness to
Yes.
what's going on. I know for me, I didn't know what it was.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's showing up on the calendar. And so it drew me to say, okay, what is this? Like, is this something that if we're going to, I mean, 4th of July just happened, so we put stuff up on Instagram like, hey, celebrate the 4th. And so before I felt comfortable putting something out there for Juneteenth, I'm like, I got to know what it is. And so for us, that's what we used it as, was, hey, this is an opportunity for us to share. This is what it is, and this is what is being celebrated. And I think that even though there's that 2-year gap, there's still a good of being able to celebrate, hey, there was a point in history when we as a country said, this is wrong, and we're going to start pivoting away from that.
Exactly. And the largest Juneteenth celebration is in Denver, and it's right there in the 5 Points area.
Yeah.
And
right
my
in your
church
backyard.
is there. So
Yeah.
that weekend, the entire block of Welton Street across the alley from me was blocked off. Of course, our parking lot was just overtaken.
Yeah.
We didn't have any restrictions in terms of the parking.
Are there specific things that happen to celebrate Juneteenth?
There are. So you've got a lot of cultural booths that are there. You've got a lot of voter registration drives that are happening to address the voting issue. That
is there? Sorry, I'm asking questions.
Sure.
Okay.
And I'm ready to answer.
Okay, good. Are there still a lot of people in the Black community that are not registered to vote?
Well, I wouldn't say a lot.
Yeah.
But there is a significant number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Sorry. Continue.
No, go. So
that's where my brain does. You trigger me, and I go, oh, that's a question I've had in the past. I would like to ask that.
But that's
here.
an ongoing issue, and not only about registering, but also being educated about the voting process and not having your vote suppressed and things of that nature. And we're seeing that happen across the country as well.
Rodney, one of the other significant events that's happened in the last, I guess, month or two is kind of the groundswell of remembrance of the Tulsa Massacre that happened in that space. And, I think that maybe I'm just ignorant, but for most of my life, I don't know.
I feel like
that
I'm going to start every phrase with that.
With your ignorant?
Yeah. I might just be ignorant,
well,
but
I don't ever remember the Tulsa Massacre, like, in my worldview as part of like history that I learned or anything to that effect. And then you sent out something to a few people about it. I heard about it, through some podcasts of it, and just the significance of it kind of moving into this new space. And I just thought maybe for those who aren't aware on the podcast, the Tulsa Massacre, it's been in the news. What happened? What is the significance of it today in terms of it being remembered, and how is it propelling some of this racial conversation forward?
A perfect example of racism in America at one of the highest degrees. Tulsa was the Tulsa community was a black community business district that blacks had built. They had everything that a community would need to advance themselves economically and to sustain themselves as a community. And because of that progression at such an early, I think it was 1921. So we're just celebrating the 100th anniversary. That's why there's such a groundswell of it. Yeah. Because of that success, they really just wiped that community out. There was an incident allegedly where a black was shining shoes. He had to go to another building to use the restroom, and there was a white lady that was an elevator operator, and some kind of way the elevator jerked and he bumped her when she ran out and cried that he had assaulted her, which was not true. And so the white men of Tulsa, policemen, came to arrest him, and the blacks stood up against that, and that sparked the whole massacre.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
they just demolished the community.
They just demolished it.
As I've been reading of the history,
you're talking about amazing. Airplane bomb drops.
Oh wow!
Just wiped it out totally. It was just horrific.
So then, the conspiracy theory behind that would be that it was all planned.
Well,
I'm just throwing that out there.
But even at that degree,
even
at that degree, it did not require that kind of reaction.
Right.
Yeah. And what's amazing is
we're good at that as humans sometimes, aren't we?
Yes.
Well, looking back on the history of Tulsa in 1921 when it happened, like there's not a historian that disagrees with the fact that the whole incident was overblown that led to really the razoring of a entire community. I mean, they just demolished the community in this space. And so, in terms of, as this groundswell is coming up in terms of its memorial, what is some of the significance of that to the black community, and how can we look back on the past to help us propel forward in some of this conversation that we're having even today?
A good question. Well, what happens with that is that not only is a community demolished, lives are lost unnecessarily, but the economic impact that has registered for 100 years has never been recaptured, regained. You talked about not knowing it, but the story itself had been suppressed in American history. So not only were you unaware, but a lot of blacks were unaware. I did not learn of that story till I got to Denver. And that was because I had members of my congregation who were from the Tulsa area who brought that up, and I'd never heard about it. So the suppression of the story really created a void in regards to what that impact had. The economic impact, I think it was registered that there was they were worth about $2 million in 1921.
Yeah, it was the richest, not only just the richest black community in America, it was one of the richest communities in America.
That's right. And so all of that economic growth was lost as a result of that. So I think about the fact when we talk about how that's impacted, I think Rockefeller invested like $3 or $4 million into the MMBB board. Today it's a $1 billion corporation.
Right.
So if to take that kind of economic then and allow it to be built would have meant much to the black community. Not only that, for those that were in Tulsa, but to send a signal that this can happen. Yeah. And not only black community, but any community who has that desire. It could have become a model to help.
It's kind of a mindset, right?
Yes.
It's overcoming the mindset of what I'm able or allowed to do.
Right.
And that happens in different places as well. But it certainly rings true here as well.
Yeah.
So I think that there are, when I think about just the whole landscape of our country right now and where we're at, we always hear the extremists on both sides, right? You know, from the far left or the far right, and those are the loudest voices always are the ones that get heard,
Exactly.
and they're the ones that are super loud in their spaces. And so, but at the same time, with just your average person in our country, we tend to navigate to the narrative that fills our own thought process from the get-go, right? So you sit here and talk about, you know, man, I can't even say the word, the racism, it escaped me. It starts with an S.
Systemic.
Systemic. There you go. Man alive. Poor guy. So systemic
Glad
racism.
Rodney was here to help
That's
you because
right.
I was just drawing blanks.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, so I mean, I have friends that say that doesn't exist, right? And they're gonna always find a narrative that that will fulfill that thought, right? And vice versa. So what do we do? How do we help bring an awareness when people, even if you bring, hey, here's a real story of somebody I know that this happened, and they say, no, that's not true. Mm-hmm. How do we, what is the process of helping to help people see what's going on and be able to move towards reconciliation, not with extremists, but just with us that are more trying to figure things out in the middle?
Well, I think you bring up two thoughts for me.
Yeah.
One is that people are always going to react based on their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So I may seem extreme, but my experience demands that
Mm-hmm.
because this is a reality for me.
Mm-hmm.
I may not be as engaged with this because I've not had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
It does not mean that it does not exist.
Yeah.
How do we get to the middle? Because racism does exist.
Mm-hmm.
It does impact and affect every single person on the earth. It's not something new. Mm-hmm. It's been happening since creation. Mm-hmm. There's this racial issue. Right now we've got the Israelis against the Palestinians. Yeah. That's been ongoing. I'm always of the mindset that we won't experience full peace until the Prince of Peace himself, Christ, mm-hmm. returns. But how do we live in this moment? Mm-hmm. So there are always triggers, right? Mm-hmm. So once we think we get over one hill, there's always something else that triggers my passion about this subject, whether it's the killing of another black man unnecessarily, or when you see a white man who may have perpetrated the same crime but is handled differently. How do we respond to, January 6th uprising at our Capitol? We just had a militia group stopped in Massachusetts. All of these things trigger the realities for those of us who are experiencing racism. On the other hand, those who are not exposed feel that this is not an issue or problem that I need to engage. So the middle ground, awareness. I think Matt and I probably have a good example. We don't talk every day. We don't see we may be 2 months, but I think about Matt all the time. I offer prayer for Matt. Matt does the same for me. We see each other in our convention and our regional work, and it's like we haven't missed a beat. But we have to intentionally develop relationships, and that has to be done with the idea that I'm just as human as you are. I'm just as valuable as you are, because really what does racism suggest? That there's a devalue of one race over of another race. Yeah. And so we need to really own that and address it.
Yeah, I have a friend that's a missionary in Rwanda, and he said something that was really interesting to me. He's done all kinds of classes on cross-cultural studies, and they're back on furlough for a year. They just went back this last month. But he said his experience of being back in America was that everybody is in this place of culture shock.
Right.
And I learned that there's stages of culture shock. And I think it's like stage 3 of 4 is you don't like the culture. And so if you're in this place of culture shock, it's not even just necessarily, I think it can come out as racism when really you're struggling with different cultures. But that's what America is, right? America is full of all kinds of different cultures and celebrating different cultures and those things. And so I think that there's a place for that too, of learning how can I understand a different culture and not feeling like because this is the way that I grew up, it's actually better than the way that you grew up. And really, it's not right and wrong. It's just different. And how can we love and appreciate the different cultures that we find ourselves in?
And what we are discovering now is that there's an uptick in terms of racism against Asian Americans. I mean, it's just unfathomable that we are targeting people just because they are of a different culture. I mean, literally attacking them in open daylight for no reason. And so what we've decided in American Baptist is that we're talking about race relations. And so we've termed that as our task force because it's more than just black, white, but it's all cultures that are experiencing some level of racism.
I think what Rodney was saying earlier is so important in terms of the relationship that he and I share, because I think that, you know, the biggest part when it comes to racism that Rodney's speaking of is, do we actually believe that all people are created in the image of God or not? As biblical Christians, that is foundational to our very existence, that we are created in the image of God, and to demean anyone, whether that be someone based on, you know, gender or their race or the color of their skin or the culture which they come from, is to devalue the image of God in that very that very space. And so I think that, you know, when there's relationship across racial lines, across cultural lines, then we see the fullness and the beauty of the image of God more clearly, where we can have an understanding and have a conversation, because it's not me fighting against whatever latest news is coming at me in terms of my, you know, is this true or not? It's me having a conversation with Rodney and going, man, tell me about your experience. And I think that that's why I brought up the Tulsa Massacre, because that's a point in history that's undebatable, where racism happened, even at a systemic level, where a whole community is raised.
Systemic.
Yes. What did I say?
That's right. I was just.
Oh, you were just.
It helps me when I keep saying the word over again, so I don't lose it again.
Where a whole community was just put out because of that, and we can look at that and say, okay, so maybe we're not there today, but that's a point in our history that shows that racism really does exist. And then what have been the fruits, consequences of that action that have played out into the future, that Rodney's dealing with today, right, as a black man in America. And from that space, then we can learn from each other and really start to interact in a way that hopefully brings about change, which is why I'm excited for what Rodney's doing with his work with the region, because I think it's needed in our churches. And I think the churches have to be the driver. And that's my biggest frustration in this whole conversation over the last year, is that the civil rights movement of the 1960s was driven by black pastors who were grounded in the image of God. And this movement that's happening right now is void
of the church,
and the theology of the church. And it's just this swinging haymaker after haymaker. And there's no grounding to that. And so what Rodney's doing with the region, I think, is so valuable and important, because if this is going to resolve, if we're going to find some peace in this life, it's because the church is driving it through Jesus, not because, you know,
and I don't know if Matt and I've had that conversation, but that is my sentiments exactly. The church has to be the driving force, and we have to set the models for the rest of our community to follow. And so American Baptist is doing a good job, and particularly here in our region, by bringing me on staff to work through this. We've got a task force that we've developed, and we're on the campaign now just to make the constituents of our region more aware. And after making them aware, start to put some practical things in place to start to exercise building relationships. I'm just a firm believer. If you get to know me, you're going to treat me differently.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you don't have that experience or that opportunity to know me, then your attitude and your disposition towards me will never change.
Yeah.
So relationship building will be the next step after we finish making people aware.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be moving into actionary steps to say, here's what we can do intentionally. This region needs to see a Matt Manning and Rodney Perry walking together. I think Eugene Downing and Ann at Calvary have established a beautiful relationship as pastors, a white and black pastor, male and female, working together in that capacity. So they're working on this issue, head on. So. Those kinds of things have to be seen by the constituents of our region, and I think we can be stronger as a result.
I really appreciate what you guys I'm kind of combining something that you both said, but you talked about listening and you talked about experiences, and I think that listening to other people's experiences and listening to hear and not listening to argue or you're not listening necessarily even to agree. You're just listening really to understand. I'm trying to understand you as a human being. I want to understand you and your experiences and how those experiences cause you to react to the things around you, right? And being able to have conversations to really know one another. I think that's a good thing.
Well, it's a lesson in all of life, right? I mean, Stephen Covey wrote it down and made millions off it, but seek to understand before being understood. Like if we can apply that to our relationships, whether that be cross-culturally, whether that be cross races, whether that be with my wife, right? My kids, like life goes a lot better when we seek to understand before being understood. And the problem is that we always want to be understood before we try to understand, which just creates us to be louder and louder and louder. And the temperature.
More and more angry.
Yeah. So I have a really important question for Rodney. Can I ask it?
Of course you can.
So this will be a little bit of a shift. But Rodney, let's say that you have a good friend who's a pastor of a predominantly white church, and in 3 weeks he's preaching on race and from the scriptures. What would you tell a predominantly white church in that setting?
If I had a good friend,
if you had a good friend who was a senior pastor of a predominantly white church,
let's call him Matt.
I got you. I would say don't compromise the gospel because, as we mentioned, racism has been an issue from the time of creation. So talk about it, preach the gospel, bring them to Christ. Christ had to address that issue when he was going through Samaria. He tells his disciples, I've got to go through Samaria. But Jesus, that never happens. That's not what we do. You need to stay in the lane that has been carved. And he says, no, I've got need. And when he goes there, he makes a difference. And so I would say to you, preach the gospel so that it makes a difference and move people from their position of comfort to start to react.
Could you give us maybe, so we have another good friend here that was telling me a story, and basically he was reaching out to one of his black neighbors trying to get to know him, and ended up through that interaction that he was going out of his way specifically to create relationship with that one person that he was told that was actually a racist thing that he was doing because he wouldn't do that for other people in the community. He had singled that person out in order to have a relationship with them. And whether that's right or wrong, that's really not my question. My question is, what does it practically look like for even me? I grew up in a white community, and I'm a middle class white guy, and I recognize that, but I don't want to be a racist, and I want to do my part in order to help move the gauge in the right direction, right? But what does that look like practically so that you're not being awkward or you're stepping out of into a place that maybe you have good intentions, but we all know where good intentions take us sometimes. And so maybe you could give us some practical things that we could be doing in order to move past just being aware. And now I want to step into practical action.
Well, I think I think we can all agree that it's going to take radical actions to get us to where we need to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, yeah, be intentional,
Mm-hmm.
but be genuine in your intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just do it so that I can feel good about it, but I
Mhm.
need to do it so that I am intentional and I'm radical
Mm-hmm.
and I'm doing it from a genuine position
Mm-hmm.
to really make a difference. It can be perceived as you described that it's an overkill
Mm-hmm.
of trying to address the issue,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you got to bring a balance to it.
Mhm.
Yes, I want to be intentional, but I also want this person to know that I'm genuine. I think Matt described it earlier, that I need to be understood I need to understand before becoming understood.
Mhm.
So all of that plays a role in it. So I reflect when you raise that question. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his campaigns had a lot of white colleagues that joined the fight.
Mhm.
MMBB came alongside of him to help finance to make sure he was taken care of. They
Mhm.
brought a check to some of his rallies and said, "We're here to help you."
Mhm.
We don't need to be out front, but we want you to know that that support is there.
Mhm.
His wife benefited as a result of MMBB coming alongside of it. She received a check through our retirement annuities until her death. But it's those kinds of support systems, and I'm not just talking about financial resources, but I'm talking about knowing that you've got people of different hues who understand that this is a problem and we've got to address it.
Mhm.
Do we all have the answer? No, but we in order to get that answer, we've got to have that conversation. And let's talk about what's the best approach
Mhm.
to start addressing this.
So, average person who may be listening to this, would you say what's your initial step to make what would be step one in order to start getting involved in helping to curve our culture in the right direction?
I would say, first of all, let's take ownership that it exists, that it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'm not fully aware,
Mm-hmm.
let's at least take ownership that it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Once I know and I take ownership of that, I can start to build the blocks
Mm-hmm.
to start making a difference. But start within me. Let's do a self-check within me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can all find some instance where we've either had racism levied against us or we have levied against somebody.
Mm-hmm. It was really interesting when we got our first foster kid yesterday.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we're real excited about it. But we had to go through a lot of training, and one of the training things was that we sat down and they asked us all of these questions because typically when it comes to fostering, a lot of times it's a minority group that is needing it, right? And so it was really interesting. What's the last movie you watched? What race was it that was the main character in that movie? Or what TV shows do you watch? Or what music do you listen to? Or just kind of going, who do you typically see at the grocery store? And it was really interesting to go through those questions. And I really think that it is a place of just not being not that you did something wrong that you're not aware, but it's coming to the realization of, oh, there's a world outside of just my world, and there are things going on out there that maybe aren't happening in my bubble, but that it doesn't mean that it's not real and doesn't exist. So
I often go back to the picture of the salad. There's so many different ingredients that you can put in the salad. Even once you mix them together, they're still identifiable.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to abandon my culture to hang out with you, to be a part of your community.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to know that we can coexist and share.
Yeah.
And what I've discovered about the salad is once you start to eat it, sometimes you pick up different parts of it, and it has a great flavor. Once it all comes together. So not only does the appearance look good, but the finished product has an impact.
Yeah.
Hey, one last question, because I know you're feeling like you're going to wrap it up.
I was getting there. You're
getting
feeling
there?
me.
I can feel. Yeah, we've been doing this long enough that I can feel that. But Rodney, could you speak to a little bit of maybe? So what I think that from a lot of white middle class America, when they look at the racial issues that are happening in America, that the movement is not just racism is the driver of it, but there seems to be a lot of things that are following the racism pretty closely, right? Like socialism / communism, in that back, the tearing down of the family unit, which was on the Black Lives Matters website before people made a big deal, and then all of a sudden it started disappearing. And so, from my perspective, what's been very difficult is to communicate that racism is real, that we need to engage in the reconciliation.
Right.
And at the same time, what always comes up is the other issues. And I guess from your perspective, have you seen those issues become problematic for for Black America in that space, that they're so tightly tied to some of these other issues? And if there was an ability to release some of those issues, that we could make more progress?
Well, without a question, I think there's got to be a part on everybody's. There's got to be a part played by everybody. Blacks have got to relax a little bit.
Yeah.
And whites have got to engage more.
Yeah.
We've got to come to that middle ground. But yes, all of those issues play a part. When you talk about the socialization or the socialism aspect of it, when you have been denied equitable access, I mean, not so much a handout, but just the opportunity to have access to build my own opportunities means much.
Yeah.
And so that becomes a problem. I've heard the term that blacks don't want to work; they're lazy, and I really take offense to that.
Yeah.
The reason we were brought to America, even though it was not a just way, was to do the work that white America didn't want to do. And so,
and we see
as
that
a result,
in the Hispanic community, right?
Yes.
Like where the Hispanics have the same
yes,
reputation, and yet you're there doing all the jobs we don't want to do.
That's right. So America is built on the backs of slaves, and yet you want to say that they are a lazy culture. But I mean, the two just doesn't come together. The other side of that is why blacks have been denied, whites have been given opportunity, and they have been able to advance more. So we've got to come to some medium. There has to be some reparations that are in place to address that, to bring blacks up to where they need to be, to give them the start that they need to have. And white America needs to be willing to help drive that kind of reconciliation that needs to happen. Again, I think I said in the first podcast, no other culture has been introduced to America like the Black Americans. The Indians were already here, and even with the injustice that was done against them, reparations have been made. The Hispanics are coming because they are looking for new opportunity. Now the issue is, let's deny them the opportunities. But the same thing happened to Irish Americans, right? To Italian Americans. They came over in a different form, but they're here. But they didn't come under the whip of a taskmaster. So when you start to look at, and it seems like it's a black-white issue, but I think that becomes the fundamental issue, is that how blacks were introduced to the American culture, and they've never been given the opportunity to be rectified or to brought totally into that system.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, steps have been made. I mean, but there's more steps to take.
Yes.
So we good to wrap up now, or
Yeah,
you good? Okay,
I have like 100 more questions,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Rodney and I are friends, so
That's
we,
right.
we can carry this on.
That's
in
right.
another
So let
space.
me raise a question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Go
Get
ahead.
you also as white men.
Yeah.
What's your perspective? Talk to me about your perspective in terms of this whole conversation.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think that for me, part of my upbringing here at Crossroads was with real significance in racial reconciliation. And it's been a big part of my heart for a long time. Like my dad was part of the Promise Keeper movement, which had a big racial reconciliation. When I was a kid, we had a relationship with Macedonia Baptist Church. And I remember going down there and being a part of that. And Reverend Brown became good friends with my dad in that space. And our families were like together in that space, in that. And then when I ended up in Kentucky for seminary, saw the KKK march for the first time, and all of the emotions that like welled up in me in that space. And so I've had a long like history from nurture of like racial reconciliation being an important part. I think I spoke to it a little bit. When I watch the issues happening today, there's deep frustration for me as a white person that now is always defaulted as a racist in that space.
Wow.
And, I look at it and I go, okay, so I'm just experiencing a small part of what the Black community has done. But I get it, right? I mean, you probably experienced the same thing. It's like even the friend that we mutually have that you just talked about,
it
like
feels
trying
like
to build a relationship with someone across the aisle is all of a sudden just termed as racism because of the color of our skin. Right. And so there's that frustration in there. There's the frustration that the driving leaders of this movement that's happening are not grounded in Scripture. They're not grounded in good theology. And we have this explosion of mixed messaging. And I think that a lot of white people don't know who to believe or what to trust in this space because it's not the trusted people moving it forward, right? It's the politicians. And we all, like Congress has a 7% approval rating right now, right? And they're the ones that are moving it forward. And it's like, why should we trust you in that space? And so I think that's
and so then they just start trusting their own experiences.
Right.
And their own experiences don't encompass everything that's going on everywhere.
Yeah. And so I think that's the, for me, trying to lead a church, I have a heart of reconciliation. And yet when I try, it's either deemed racist because I'm trying too hard, right? Or if I'm silent, I'm not doing enough. And because I don't subscribe to all of what has been attached to the Black movement currently, then I have to throw all of it away. And that comes from both sides, the Black and the white side in that space. It's like, well, if I don't think that I have to agree with all of it. I can just look at the world and go, Blacks have been treated pretty unfairly throughout the history of the United States. That should be different. As Christians, we should think differently about this. Let's not only think, but act differently when it comes to this. And both sides going, no, you're wrong. It's all or nothing. And it's like, I don't think it has to be that way. So I guess for me, there's a lot of frustration in the current culture of this. And I try to separate it from my own personal struggles in this space, and go, just don't be a whiner, keep doing the work that you need to do. And if somebody says that I have a relationship with, a Black man like yourself is racist, then okay, then
I'm racist.
Then I'm racist, and when I get to heaven, if God says, "Man, that was the wrong decision to make," then I'll just live with that consequence, I guess. But in my heart, I don't believe that is either racism or wrong. And so if people want to tag me in that space, then let them tag me. I'm going to do what I think I'm being called to do, but there is a lot of frustration in that.
Yeah, I have a good friend that he's a pastor and he's also a mayor of a town in Iowa. And so I've been able to have some good conversations with him because I grew up in Thornton, and it was a predominantly white community, but I've always had Black friends, Hispanic friends. I just didn't really think about it because I didn't have to. And so I think being able to have some conversations with him. His family's from Georgia, and I think it was, it might be like 6 months ago that they were changing some of the voter laws. It was Georgia, right?
During the Senate race, yeah.
Yeah. Where they weren't allowed to bring water and different things along those lines. And I was really confused by it. I'm like, because the thing that was pushed was that you needed voter identification, right? And I'm like, that makes sense to me. Like, why wouldn't you have to have everybody has an ID. There's this video floating around of a guy going around in New York, asking black people, hey, do you have identification? And they're like, yeah, of course I do. Like, why wouldn't I? And so they're spinning it as, everybody has ID. Why is it bad to have this law? So I was able to have a conversation with him about, these rural areas in Georgia where people have a hard time getting to places, all the different variables that I'm unaware of that is making it harder for these communities to have a voice. And so that was really good to have that conversation with him, just to bring aware. And I said, so the problem isn't, should we have a law that says you need an ID in order to vote? The problem is we need to help these people have an ID that don't have one. Like, that's the real issue. And he's like, yes, I totally agree with that, And so that was really good for me to walk that through, because it's impossible to know what you don't know. Right. And so that's the thing that's frustrating to me, is that when I say I don't know, they'll say, well, that's just because you're a privileged white person. And I'm like, but I can't help that, until you help me understand how am I supposed to see outside of my own walls. And I want to, but when it feels like no matter what you do, you're wrong. And so for me, it's figuring out what is the win, and how can I do that in an appropriate way where I'm not an idiot, or I'm not ignorant, or I'm not just walking in privilege, or whatever the excuse might be. How do I do the right thing by what Jesus would be asking me to do? How do I love other cultures well? How do I love other races well in a way that doesn't put me on a hey, we're here to come. I know that's patronizing too, right? Here comes the white guy to help the black guy. Like that doesn't help anything either.
That approach has to be done correctly, because it could be offensive.
Right.
But I think we've got the best platform, and Matt said it earlier, the church.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if we would allow the Spirit of Christ to guide our movement, even around this issue, we don't lose. If the Spirit of Christ is guiding us. And I want to let me just applaud Matt on his leadership at the regional level, because he had to deal with this as sitting president, and led the board to bring to the point that we would create a task force, brought me on as a staffer to sort of help build that position and to drive this effort in our region. Let me applaud Steve Van Ostren, our executive minister, who is totally in. The staff of the region is totally in. It is a slow process, but we are committed and engaged to that. As a result, on the website at abcrm.org, there's a tab for race relations. And the whole point of that tab is to create a library of references where people can go and see some of the experiences that have played out in America that brings this issue to the forefront, so that they can become aware. We're also trying to put legislative initiatives on there so people can understand what the thread of the legislation is around this issue. So it's going to be a very important resource to help drive this conversation within our region.
That's good. That's a really practical thing that people can do, is they can go to the website, they can check it out, and we'll look forward to what your task force comes up with, because I'm almost certain there's going to be opportunities down the road for us to be involved, and from both sides of all sides of the spectrum, right? For us to move forward in reconciliation. So
yeah, I think one of the things that I said earlier is that you don't know who to trust in this situation, and that's like the frustrating piece. I think that what brings me a lot of hope is that I do trust Rodney, and I'm so grateful that he stepped into this role and that he's leading this charge, because he is a man of faith. He's a man committed to Jesus.
Yes.
You know, he's grounded in good theology, and he wants to see, you know, racial reconciliation happen. And he, you know, he's leading this charge. And you said it's slow, and it's slow because we're unwinding 200 years of history, right? Within this, and so
he's grounded in good theology,
yes,
and he's well versed in bad theology.
That's right.
So, well, thank you, Rodney, so much for coming on, and we'll just continue to have conversations with you. I'm certain that we will down the road, and so thank you so much for the work that you're doing and helping to start with that first step of just bringing awareness. And so hopefully this podcast today will help do that as well. And again, go to what is the web address?
abcrm.org.
So easy, abcrm.org. So go check it out. And if you have questions, you know, please, you know, write them in, ask, like, there's not a bad question.
That's
so we want to help answer any questions that you might have. You can do that by really emailing Matt.
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. Matt.manning@crossroadsabc.com.
Yep.
I'm sure Rodney would be happy to, if you want to shoot out your email too, so anyone wanted to email you.
It is rperry@abcrm.org.
Perfect. So let's continue the conversation, continue to educate yourself, become more aware of what's going on around you outside of your own bubbles, no matter where you are. And let's continue to work together through the leadership of Jesus and through the leadership of the church to see this reconciliation moving forward. So thanks, guys, so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
You bet.